Well, believe it or not, the school year has begun for some states, and already we're seeing the fear that most parents have raised for months coming into play. This is BNC Prime News. I'm Fred Hickman.
And I'm Laverne McGee. It's Wednesday, August 5th. In Georgia, a second grader tested positive for the virus after attending the first day of school, echoing a similar situation in Indiana last week. Worldwide, there's over 18.6 million confirmed cases of COVID-19. Globally, 702,000 people have died. In the U.S., there's 4.8 million cases. The death toll here reaching over 157,000. Parents and teachers across the country now scared for what seems the inevitable.
I'm not going to be able to teach any children if I am having to take extended medical leave or if I die.
Officials say while young children appear to be less susceptible to the virus, they can and do get sick.
Tonight, doctors from Johns Hopkins University are calling it an absolute miracle. A Maryland man who faced death with COVID-19 after he and his wife both contracted the virus. 2 months into his recovery, he's trying to get back to his old self.
He spent about a month and a half in the ICU in the hospital and nearly a month on a ventilator. BNC's Brittany Jones joins us now live in the studio. Brittany, how has the recovery been for this couple?
Well, Laverne and Fred, when he first got home, they had to hire help to take care of him because he could barely function on his own. But his wife tells me the only thing that kept her faith was her constantly praying on her own and with the prayer group she created to pray for her husband's survival.
And I couldn't move. I was paralyzed.
A 56-year-old healthy man, highly active, known for DJing, and used to cutting the grass. But when he came face to face with the coronavirus, T. Clark could no longer move.
I'm a pretty active person, highly active, I would say. My wife says I'm an energized bunny. And I just started feeling sick one day, so we decided to go take the COVID test. And I got my results back the next day, and so did she. And we both came back positive.
He had a fever, he had a cough. He was kind of textbook for COVID.
Absolutely.
In terms of the symptoms. He had them all. I didn't have much of anything.
Marcy recovered quickly, but for T, it sent him to the hospital. He was in bad shape. Johns Hopkins doctors surrounded him with immediate care.
But when I woke up, I was very, very nervous and scared because I woke up to a bunch of bells and lights and whistles and a ton of people hovering over me.
28 days on the ventilator and a total of 46 days in the hospital.
I mean, that's a month that, you're in a medically induced coma, and it's a roller coaster ride.
Did you have the worst thoughts at some point?
Yeah, you do have the worst thoughts at some point. I mean, there was a time when his oxygen levels bottomed, and they actually called me and asked me about end-of-life measures.
But doctors like Dr. April Pruski made sure that wasn't the end for T. In fact, it was a new beginning.
But to relearn all of those things, it's hard. And when we're able to break that down for patients and see that people can have this amazing recovery, what pushes us is seeing great outcomes like T's outcome, seeing that, that all of the medical therapies that we're doing and the rehab therapies that we're doing really gets patients going.
And then the big day came when T got to see the outside world again. Very emotional.
So they rolled me out. It was a rainy day, and I was just happy. I kept telling the nurse, get me to the car before they changed their mind for releasing. So I got in the car, and we had a big family reunion out there. People came to see me. It was great. It was one of the happiest moments.
It was really moving to know that that's what we worked for, that we worked for this person to be home with their family.
The couple did everything right, from quarantine to not traveling, and still ended up with the virus. And while T was one of the blessed ones to survive, they still have a message for those who aren't heeding to the warnings.
And I had someone say to me one day, I don't like wearing a mask because I can't breathe. I said, well, you can't breathe when you have a tube down your throat either. And I'm speaking from experience.
If there's anything that you can possibly do to protect yourself, I strongly encourage people to take this seriously and to do it, because COVID truly doesn't discriminate.
For the Black News Channel, I'm Brittany Jones.
Well, the couple says they still can't put a percentage on his level of recovery, but he did finally test negative in June after initially going to the hospital back in March. They are both so grateful for the team of doctors that helped him from Johns Hopkins Hospital. Clark's wife says she journaled every day about this experience, and the couple is writing a book hoping it will help others.
Boy, what a miraculous story indeed, Brittany. Did the doctor speak at all about how the long-term effects may kick in? Not only will this patient see them possibly, but others who have suffered from this virus as well.
Yes, the doctor tells me post-intensive care syndrome will likely be a long-term effect. That goes for those who experience long ICU stays like T. She says people could suffer both mentally and physically. Like T, it's hard for them to get some sleep, some having issues thinking cognitively, anxiety, pain, and PTSD and depression. But the doctor says most importantly, there are intervention programs and treatments for these as long as these patients surround themselves with a good team of doctors and therapists. Fred Laverne.
Thanks, Brittany. And we want to know how you're coping during this COVID-19 pandemic. Tell us by submitting a photo or video. You can email us at news@blacknewschannel.com, and your submission could appear right here on our network.
The family of Rayshard Brooks and their attorney is now speaking out. That after the officer charged in Brooks' killing went on vacation. Brooks was shot and killed back in June by Garrett Rolfe outside a Wendy's restaurant in Atlanta. He was fired the very next day. Rolfe is facing 11 charges in the shooting, including felony murder. He was granted bond June 30th. During a news conference today, the lawyer for the family of Rayshard Brooks said the judge was very clear that Rolfe was not supposed to leave the state of Georgia without permission.
Officer Rolfe going on vacation to Florida, not just after having killed Rayshard Brooks, but in the middle of the pandemic. It was mind-blowing to see that Officer Rolfe decided to ignore the court rules and regulations and standards that have been set upon him for his bond and to go to Florida.
Fulton County District Attorney Paul Howard in Atlanta has now asked the judge to revoke Rolfe's bond.
This next issue is concerning. Just Google uptick in hate crime and your browser will offer a long list. New York City alone experienced a 233% increase in anti-black crime in the first 2 months of this year over the first 2 months of last year.
And that's before the COVID-19 pandemic hit full stride. Mix in anti-brown, anti-Asian, anti-Semitic crimes and incidents, and you have a bubbling cauldron of hate working in America today.
Joining us now to discuss this disturbing trend is Leisha Brooks. She is the Chief of Staff of the Southern Poverty Law Center in Montgomery, Alabama. Welcome to BNC Prime.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for joining us. And if I'm not wrong here, I saw only 3 states on your hate map on your website which have not recorded any hate crimes during the past year or so. Is this elevation in racist and religious-based incidents a new development, or is it that these incidents are just now being more fully and openly reported?
I believe it's the latter. Hate crimes, hate groups have existed in the United States for quite some time. The Southern Poverty Law Center, since the mid-1980s, began tracking hate and extremist groups. Each year we produce an annual census identifying all the active hate groups in the United States. And for 2019, we identified 940. That was a slight drop from a high of 1,020 in 2018. Now, those are hate and extremist groups that we track. I can tell you that our best estimate as to the number of hate crimes or hate incidents that exist or that take place each year are about 250,000.
Well, the country is experiencing a racial divide. Of course, it may or may not be spurred on with the George Floyd killing and encouraged by that. But how has that tragic incident affected frequency of hate-driven occurrences?
You see a backlash whenever there's protests and black folks standing up for civil and human rights. You'll see backlash from hate and extremist groups, and I'm talking about white supremacist groups or that particular ideology. Whenever there's a sense that one group, especially a marginalized group, is getting more attention, is getting the support of local government, then you'll have a pushback from hate and extremist groups. So we have seen more of it. We saw it, and if you want to talk about in the context of COVID, you'll recall that Asians were the first target of misinformation and hate directed at them, and the president continues to refer to it as the Chinese flu, and that is a vilification of Asians. We saw in the aftermath of Mr. Floyd's murder an increase in attacks against Black people, and we've seen that it documented many times across social media platforms. So it's a normal kind of push and pull.
Well, and I'm glad to hear you mention the whole trickle-down effect, because we've heard a lot of dog whistling these past few months and weeks, but we've seen white supremacists becoming a lot more emboldened, coast to coast and border to border. To what do you attribute that?
Well, it's interesting you asked. We began to see white supremacists become more emboldened back in 2016 before the presidential campaign. When Mr. Trump first entered the campaign as a candidate, he entered vilifying Mexicans, if you recall. And so the way he ran his campaign and won really served to embolden white supremacists across the country. And we see that continue to this day. As the Trump administration continues to put out what you refer to as dog whistles, we call it a white nationalist speaking points, where you vilify people of color, you vilify people from immigrants, you vilify any number of people, and so they've become quite emboldened since the Trump administration came into office.
Ms. Leisha Brooks, Chief of Staff with the Southern Poverty Law Center in Montgomery, Alabama, we thank you so much for your time and for the enlightenment. You're welcome here anytime.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right after the break, with changes coming to the census that could lead to issues for some communities, we'll take a look at how it could especially affect people of color. Stay tuned. This is BNC Prime.